Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the creative world. My name is Ryan, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys a quick and dirty editing breakdown of the following image. Alright, so first thing is first, and that is cutting my subject out from the background as always. To do this, I'm going to use the pen tool. As I've said before, when it comes to making selections of your subject, or rather cutting your subject out from the background, it's very easy to become a perfectionist, but keep in mind your medium of which you're going to display your images. So if, for example, you're going to be showing your images on Facebook or Instagram, you do not have to be that precise with your selections because no one's going to be zooming in to the pixel level to see any mistakes that you may have. So save yourself a hassle, save yourself some time, and be less than perfect with it. So one thing you'll notice is that I'm doing a very rough selection of my subject's hair, and that is because they didn't have a lot of time to style their wig before the photo shoot, so I'm going to use a technique after the fact to style the wig here in Photoshop. Once I am finished making my selection with the pen tool, I will go over to the Paths tab, right click and make selection and keep the default values. Go back to the Layers tab, and then I will add a layer mask to my subject, effectively cutting out my subject from the background. So in order to style the wig, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cutout from the character's hair itself from the show, overlay that over my subject, set it to the right scale and rotation, and once I have that in place, I'm going to control click the thumbnail of that reference photo to make a selection. And with that selection, on the Layers layer mask, I'm going to paint white inside of that selection to make sure the hair is filled out. I'm then going to invert that selection and paint black to clear anything else outside of that selection. Once I am happy with the overall silhouette of my hair, I'm going to go in with a textured brush to paint in some of the rough edges of the hair. After that, I'm going to create another layer, and using just a simple round brush, I'm going to paint in individual hair strands just to add a little bit more realism to this. Alright, so the next step is to fix up the background image. So let's go ahead and duplicate once more the background layer, turn off the original, and let's go ahead and delete this layer mask. So as you can see here, I shot this on a seamless backdrop, but the backdrop wasn't big enough to cover the whole frame, and there's also my light stand and my light reflector in this. So I'm going to get rid of that using various different tools such as the clone stamp tool, the healing brush tool, patch tool, and a few other little tips and tricks that you'll see here. So first and foremost, we are going to get rid of some of this hair because as you can see, the styled hair is a little bit smaller in volume than the original hair. So I'm going to go ahead and make a selection of the original layer, invert that selection, and then using the clone stamp tool, I'm just going to clean up some of these edges. So when it comes to removing objects from the background such as light stands, the patch tool comes in very handy, and most of the time it works pretty flawlessly. So now that I have my background cleaned up very well, I do want to extend my background to fill the canvas in this aspect ratio. So to do this, I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool, make a selection of the borders here, and then go up to Edit and Content Aware Scale. Then when holding Shift and selecting this middle slider right here, I can drag this over and extend my canvas. And I will repeat this process for the other side. And just like that, I have a nice, clean, seamless backdrop. Although it's not absolutely perfect, it does have a little bit of texture, and sometimes that goes a long way. Nothing is ever perfect, so when you have a perfectly clean gradient background, it looks kind of off. This makes it look a little bit more natural. And one step before I get onto all the special effects and other things of that nature, I do want to enhance the shadow going on the ground underneath my subject, but I'm not going to go too crazy with it. I'm going to be pretty simple, so I'm just going to create a new layer underneath my subject layer and above my background layer. Let's go ahead and rename these. And then I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool and just make a rough selection like that. Go ahead and press Shift Delete, fill it with black, add a little bit of a blur to it, not too much, just a few pixels. Maybe change it to overlay, and let's reduce the opacity a little bit. And that is looking pretty good. Maybe I'll extend this a little bit on the sides. And now we got a nice simple shadow. Nothing too complex, but I think it adds. Actually, now that I think about it, I am going to make it a little bit thinner in the middle here. Something like that works pretty well. Don't forget to save your work. So the next step is a little bit of skin retouching. To do this, I'm going to use a frequency separation action. Using the spot healing brush tool on the high frequency layer, this is what I'll use to get rid of any kind of blemishes that there may be. This is also useful if you have any hair that's going across the subject's face. This is also useful if you have any hair strands that are going across the subject's face. Next, on the low frequency layer, I will be using a lasso tool with a large feathering, and I'm going to select large portions of the skin that have uneven skin tones that I want to kind of blur out. So once I make that selection, I'm going to go ahead and add a bit of a Gaussian blur to it. Don't go overboard, otherwise it'll look very unnatural. For this, I'd say around 13 pixels will do. And I will repeat this process for the rest of the image. Once I've finished with my frequency separation, I'm going to select the frequency group and merge all those layers together. I'm then going to control click the thumbnail of my original subject to create a mask, or rather a selection, and go ahead and create a new layer mask on that frequency separation layer. And I will just apply that layer mask. The next step is dodge and burn. To do this, I will use an action that creates two curves layers, one that darkens and one that brightens, with an inverted layer mask on each. To dodge and burn, I'm simply going to use a soft round brush with a flow set to around 20 or 30% and painting white on the layer mask of dodge and burn respectively. Whenever you're doing dodging and burning, it's always good to follow the same principles as you would if you were shading a circle to make it look like a sphere. The goal with dodge and burn is to create depth. You don't necessarily have to paint every single highlight and every single shadow. Once I'm finished with my dodge and burn, I always like to turn the opacity of my layers down to around 80%, just so it's not as strong. Alright, so before I start on my special effects, I'm going to select all of my subject layers and group them all together. And with my special effects, I'm going to start backward and work my way forward. So I'm going to select behind my subject layer. I'm going to create a new layer and set that to screen. With this, I'm going to select a large soft round brush with a nice deep rich green color and paint in something just like this. This is because I know that I'm going to have some glow effects in the background that will be bright enough to give off a glow behind my subject. So from here on out, I'm going to be heavily utilizing my new energy asset pack that I just created and that you can get over on my Gumroad, link down below. Now with these assets, these are meant to be as much of a drag and drop asset as possible. That being said, all you have to do is simply drag the asset into your image, set the blending mode to either screen or linear dodge, and that is essentially it. From there you can do things such as transform, free transform, warp, puppet warp, blurring, and any other kind of transforming effects that you want to create as much of a unique look as possible. So in order to add some depth to this image and make the background effects look like they are a little bit further away from the camera, I'm going to select all of them, merge them together, set the blending mode back to screen, and then I'm going to add a Gaussian blur to them. The effect doesn't have to be that strong. A slight amount is enough to make it seem like it's further away. So I do want to make it seem like light is scattering in all different kinds of directions behind my subject from these energy particles. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate that layer once more, go up to filter, blur, and then radial blur. From here, I'll turn the amount all the way up. The blur method is zoom, and good quality is good enough. And go ahead and hit OK. I'm pretty happy with how that looks, but I want it to be a little bit more of a stronger effect, so I'm going to press Ctrl F to redo that filter. All right, it's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to scale it up just a little bit, just so it's a little bit more pronounced. So I am pretty happy with how all of those look in the background. I'm going to select all of those background elements and create a new group. So now I'm going to work on adding some special effects around my subject. And to do this, I'm using all the same methods as I did for my background layer, simply dragging and dropping in my assets, changing the blending mode to screen, and just turning things around and changing up the positions until it looks good. So in order to make this image a little bit more dynamic, I am going to change the color of each one of these subject layer effects just a little bit. Alright, so I am now happy with all the subject layer effects. I'm going to select all of those layers and group them together and rename them. So now I'm going to work on all the foreground elements, and that is as simple as before, dragging and dropping in the elements, placing them where you want them, and adding a blur where necessary. And so now I'm going to move on with the sharpening and color toning phase. So to do this, with the topmost layer selected, I'm going to press Ctrl Shift Alt and E to merge all visible layers into a new layer on top. I'm going to set the blending mode of this layer to Overlay, go up to Filter, Other, and then High Pass Filter. Then I'm going to select a radius of about 3 pixels or so until I get a sharpening that I am happy with. After the sharpening, I like to add a little bit of stylized chromatic aberration. To do this, I'm going to merge all visible layers into a new layer on top again. Double click that layer to bring up the blending options and turn off one of the color channels. I'm going to turn off red in this case and hit OK. Then I'm going to press Ctrl T to scale my image. Move the center point on my subject's face. Let's enter in 101% size and hit OK. So now, as you can see, I have a nice chromatic aberration effect near the borders of my image, and as it gets closer to the face, the effect becomes more subtle. For the color toning, again, merge all visible layers onto a new layer on top, right-click that layer, set it as a smart object, and then I'm going up to Filter, and then Camera Raw. Once I'm in Camera Raw, I'm going to load up one of my preset settings, and all this does is various different levels of effects here, some curves adjustments, and adding some film grain. And the last and final step is to create a color lookup adjustment layer. Set the blending mode to color so it only affects my colors and not the levels of my layers, and then load up a custom LUT. And that is the whole process for this image. Guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, maybe give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing. By the way, guys, if you want a deeper insight into my editing process, which includes getting your hands on an original Photoshop document, consider joining my Patreon, link down below. And until next time, stay creative.